So, Charlotte, let's get into who Dr. Munjed Al Muderis is, because I think it's fair to say he had something of a difficult start, I guess, for someone who then went on to become one of the country's most acclaimed orthopedic surgeons. So, tell us a little bit about who he is.
Yeah, Dr. Al Muderis has a fascinating life story as documented in his various memoirs. He came to Australia as a refugee and he spent almost a year in one of Australia's most notorious immigration detention centres, Curtin, which is in the Western Australian desert. When he was finally released from there, he built a very successful career as an orthopedic surgeon. He was most known for his practice in osseointegration surgery, which is an invasive and fairly new procedure for amputees that can have, for the right people, incredible benefits. It can help people walk again. It can relieve the blisters and chafing that come with traditional socket prosthetics, but it also comes with immense risks. And how Dr. Al Muderis portrayed those risks to his patients is ultimately what got him in trouble.
So, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I really want to find out about how you first heard about this story because it's personal. So, tell us a little bit about that.
It is. So news stories come from any number of places. They can come from whistleblowers, sources, documents, wherever. In this case, this story came from a fleeting interaction with my father from 2018. He is an amputee himself, a below-knee amputee, and he consulted Dr. Al Muderis in 2018. Now, my dad at the time was in his mid-70s and he'd walked his entire life, without difficulty. In that appointment, Dr. Al Muderis recommended that he get osseointegration surgery, and if he didn't, he'd be in a wheelchair by the time he was 80 years old. So that really sent my dad into a bit of a tailspin, and my mother noticed that, this was quite an extraordinary recommendation. So he got a second opinion, and he ultimately was told, don't get this surgery. There is an underclass of patients with significant complications left addicted to heavy pain medications and other problems. So he decided against it, and he's 80 years old. He just turned 81 this week, and he's still walking. But that kind of fleeting interaction from many years ago always stuck in the back of my mind, just how much Dr. Al Muderis's recommendation he get the surgery impacted him and, the warnings from those people who told him otherwise.
And you really did get quite stark warnings. I know you wrote in one of your stories that a Sydney surgeon told you everyone has a story about Munjed Al Muderis, and he didn't mean that in a positive way. And as part of your initial investigation, you spoke with former and current patients of the doctor from all over around the world, as well as medical staff and whistleblowers. But I really want you to tell us the story of one particular patient, Leah Mooney.
Yeah, Leah Mooney is an amazing woman. I've got to know her and her family very well throughout this experience, but she was one of Dr. Al Muderis's early patients. She badly broke her leg during a skiing incident in 2011. And she was treated by Dr. Al Muderis. He operated on her leg, and when she came out of that surgery, it protruded violently to one side. And all of her family was saying, this doesn't look right, can you do something? And then he falsely misrepresented to her and the family that he needed to do a second surgery as part of a planned 2-stage surgery. Now, that was a lie. It always was a lie. But in any event, the second surgery went ahead, and after that, Leah developed an infection, which had devastating consequences. She ended up suing Dr. Al Muderis for medical negligence and got a $1.75 million payout. But her leg is still damaged permanently to this day from his failure to diagnose that infection.
And if I understand this correctly, your story indicated that another surgeon, I think, was quite shocked by the infection that he or she found in her leg once Leah Mooney subsequently went to another doctor, right? And found that, I think he was quite surprised that Dr. Muderis had not seen the severity of this infection. Is that right?
Exactly. The infection was very far progressed to an alarming degree. And this doctor who treated Leah subsequently couldn't understand why he didn't investigate. She had all the symptoms of infection. Her leg was pussing, it was red, it was swollen. Various doctors had raised with Dr. Al Muderis specifically they were concerned about infection, and he aggressively dismissed them. He was rude to them, and he told them things like, osteomyelitis is not a term we like to use in orthopedic surgery. So it was quite an extraordinary reaction to what should be something that doctors take very seriously. Any sign of infection should be investigated properly immediately, and that simply didn't happen here.
And did he just deny that there was any infection? Is that what he said?
Yes, and in fact, he initially blamed the crookedness of her leg on the plate that he inserted. But when the next doctor opened her up and saw the plate, he said, there's nothing to do with it. It's not the plate, it's the application of the plate. Wow. So not only did Dr. Al Muderis fail to diagnose the infection, he failed to conduct the initial surgery in an appropriate manner. It's really devastating, the impact that this treatment has had on her. Leah Mooney was a very active person prior to this accident. And while her leg break was bad, Dr. Al Muderis' treatment of her made it irreversibly worse. So that was one part. But the other part that really impacted Leah and other patients was just the way that he dismissed her concerns time and time again, the way he lied to her about the surgeries that he was performing, and the way he just did not take her concerns seriously. It made her doubt herself, it made her doubt the whole medical system, and it really eroded trust in Australia's healthcare system, which is a really unfortunate situation.
And now the first story that you had about these allegations against Al Muderis, it was published in 2022. So what happened after that, and how did the doctor himself react to it?
His reaction was incredibly defensive from the very beginning. He has always denied that he has done anything wrong. He has blamed his patients. He has effectively gone to war with his patients, accusing them of lying. One he called, through his counsel, a lying fantasist, which the judge found was an extremely disrespectful thing for a doctor to say, let alone about their own patient. So he's had this scorched earth mentality from the very beginning. And that's very reflective of the findings, the credit findings that the judge ultimately made on Dr. Al Muderis as someone who simply is not able to accept that he's done anything wrong, despite mountains of evidence against him, and his determination to lie in the face of plain documents. So he applied that approach to the media. He went on the attack. He said the stories were false. He said the patients were lying. He briefed, through his lawyers or him personally, News Corp papers to denigrate our witnesses, to denigrate the patients, and to denigrate myself and my father. So he had a multi-pronged attack on me, the patients, our journalism, and our company, and ultimately he was found to be the liar.
Well, let's get to this attack, really, that you sustained and lots of other people have sustained, because you keep mentioning the judge. And of course, there was a judge involved because he sued Nine, the company we work for defamation, alleging that the stories that you wrote did defame him. And let's get into this, because as part of the defamation action, you were in, I've got to say, it's got to be an unenviable position of being cross-examined in court by one of Australia's most well-known defamation lawyers, Sue Chrysanthu. Just to remind the listeners, she is considered the defamation barrister in Australia. She's represented actor Geoffrey Rush and Gina Reinhart and Lachlan Murdoch. Now, this is pretty extraordinary because you actually spent 6 days in the witness stand being grilled by Chrysanthu. We actually think that sets a record for the longest cross-examination of any Australian journalist, even a day longer than mushroom murderer Aaron Patterson was cross-examined. I mean, this sounds like an absolute nightmare. Can you just take us through a little bit, I guess, what's that like?
Yeah, it was not a nice situation to be in, particularly the method and approach that Chrysanthu took to the cross-examination, not just of me, but to all the patients. It was extremely aggressive at times. It was quite personal. So while I was understandably nervous, as anyone is getting in the witness box like that, ultimately I didn't find it that challenging, to be honest, because we had truth on our side. And, you know, when you're telling the truth, it's quite easy to answer questions. And when she's putting theories to you that are simply bizarre and beyond comprehension, it was quite easy to say, no, you're not right. So while 6 days is an extraordinarily long time and an exhausting experience for me and all the other witnesses, ultimately it was easy because we were telling the truth.
Well, this takes us to the next issue, which is, of course, the judgment that finally came back, and it was in your favor. So what did the judgment actually say, and what did it mean to you and I guess his former patients?
Yeah, so the judgment is 770 pages long. It came out last Friday. I've been reading it pretty much, as much of it as I can in the entire time since it was released. As I go through it in more and more detail, it's just emphatically proves time and time again that all the patients were telling the truth. It proves that all the patients were telling the truth. It proves that Dr. Al Muderis prioritised money, fame and numbers over the safety of his patients. It proves Dr. Al Muderis acted unethically across various points of his practice. So what that judgment found was that all of the patients who spoke out, all of our experts and all of the surgeons were completely vindicated. The judge found Dr. Al Muderis's practice was unethical across multiple parts of his business. She found he was callous towards his patients, some of them, and mistreated them severely by not responding to their pleas for help. It was a really important judgment that really backed in not just the journalism that we printed, but the stories of the patients who gained nothing by coming on the stand and telling their story.
And I really wanted to get into the importance of this finding, even more broadly, beyond, of course, your own vindication and the vindication of the former patients who have suffered and, they weren't believed. And, of course, it must be, hugely gratifying on some level, of course, to now finally be believed or have their experiences validated. But this was actually the first time that a new defense against defamation was successfully used in this country. And that's a defense that the story was actually in the public's interest. So can you tell us a bit about what this actually means and I guess what impact this could have for future cases of defamation?
So there were two kind of important judgments throughout this case for broader investigative journalism. One was around confidential sources. So that was an application that was seen by a separate judge, but essentially he upheld my right to maintain confidentiality over a number of my sources. These were healthcare practitioners, they were surgeons, they were prosthetists, they were rehab specialists who had serious concerns about Dr. Al Muderis but didn't want to speak publicly because they were worried that he would come after them.
I mean, these are your whistleblowers, right?
Yes, exactly. And there were dozens of them. But what we had to prove there was that there was a public interest in maintaining that confidentiality. And often courts don't uphold that journalist privilege. But in this ruling by Justice Bromwich, he found that there was a significant public interest in protecting the free flow of information between healthcare practitioners and journalists on matters of public interest, which are health. So the second important part of this judgment is the public interest defence, which was successful for the first time in this case. And the judge made a number of important findings, which will be important to shape thinking of how we report stories in the future. It all hinged on the reasonableness of our conduct and the reasonableness of our belief that these stories were in the public interest. And my belief and the other journalists, Tom Steinfort and Natalie Clancy, all had the belief that these stories were significantly in the public interest because of the institutional failures of the medical regulators to do their job to keep the public safe. And the judge believed that these opinions were reasonably held. So it's a great win for journalism in the sense that the public interest defence can work, unlike prior similar defences like the qualified privilege defence, which basically failed almost every time. So the future is a little bit brighter for those public interest investigations.
And just to clarify for listeners, so the qualified privilege defense that used to be used, when you said it used to fail a lot, it meant that essentially publications were successfully sued for defamation, and it was sort of like a deterrent, I guess, from them pursuing public interest journalism?
Exactly. Up until recently, Australia has been a very easy place for plaintiffs to sue for defamation. Sydney was known as the defamation capital of the world because the defences were pretty flimsy for media companies. But I think with now the Ben Roberts-Smith victory, the Lerman victory, and this victory, hopefully it sends a warning signal to people who have done the wrong thing and get exposed for it in the press that they shouldn't sue for defamation.
And you said before that this, victory will shape future stories of the way we cover, I guess, alleged wrongdoing. So how will it shape future stories, do you think?
Well, ultimately, we'll see how that plays out. But I think what's clear is that this judgment shows that public interest journalism matters, and it will give editors, journalists, and lawyers the confidence to publish public interest investigations. Defamation has historically been a tool used by powerful people with deep pockets to stop the public knowing about important matters of public interest. And that spans right across society, from politics to business to, in this case, healthcare. So I hope that this judgment empowers journalists and editors and lawyers to continue publishing public interest investigations, because we've shown now that they can be defended successfully.
And so just so I can understand what the judge in this case has actually ruled that Dr. Al Muderis has done, because we know that this is a civil case. This is a case revolving around defamation. It's not a criminal case revolving around his alleged medical negligence itself. So what has she actually found that he has done? What proof is there that these people that you've spoken to, all of his former patients, they say they've suffered under his hands? What evidence is there that they're right?
So the evidence in this case came from around 30 of Dr. Al Muderis' patients. They all provided affidavits about what happened to them. They also provided their medical records, and we subpoenaed their medical records from Dr. Al Muderis' hospital as well as other hospitals. When we had all that body of documentation, each side hired experts to assess the quality of care provided by Dr. Al Muderis. So we had 2 independent experts on our side for every single one of those patients. And those experts had to assess, in their professional opinion, whether Dr. Al Muderis' conduct met or fell below a reasonable standard of care. And in almost all of our patient case studies, our independent experts found that he was negligent in one way or another. Now, he had his own experts who the judge ruled had serious conflicts. Many of his experts had shareholdings with him. They were friends with him. One of them described them as a kindred spirit with Dr. Al Muderis. In fact, quite extraordinarily, Dr. Al Muderis himself presented himself as an independent expert in this case. So the judge had to make a ruling on which set of experts she believed, our experts or his experts. And in the end, she believed ours and she believed the patient's. So she ruled that he failed to provide the appropriate standard of care across multiple parts of his practice for a significant cohort of his patients. She ruled that this wasn't an anomaly or a coincidence or a small sample size. She said it was a significant cohort, and she was fortified in her view. So broadly, the judge found there were unethical elements throughout every stage of his practice. That's from the patients he chose to operate, which she deemed inappropriate, to the aftercare he provided, where he ignored pleas for help, to the way that he solicited patients using high-pressure sales tactics. So it was a very comprehensive finding of unethical behaviour at every stage of his medical practice. One of the more harrowing examples of poor patient selection was Mark Urquhart. Now, he featured in our initial investigation. Dr. Al Muderis performed a double amputation on him. He was a paraplegic. And osseointegration after that. The judge ruled this was an experimental surgery.
And I have to ask you a question that I imagine a lot of listeners would be thinking right now, which is, where does this now leave Dr. Al Muderis? Can he still practice after this defamation judgment?
We've gone to all the hospitals he works at for comment. Macquarie Uni Hospital is the largest hospital that he's affiliated with, and they're standing by him. So they say they're going to cooperate with any investigations that are pending. Medibank has said it's very concerning. They have a relationship with Dr. Al Muderis through a short stay hospital at Macquarie University Hospital. So there are a number of investigations pending, but it seems for now that Macquarie Uni Hospital is maintaining that it has high standards and Dr. Al Muderis is welcome there.
And do we know what sort of surgeries he's still performing?
Yes. So, I mean, he has no restrictions currently on his practice. So, technically, he could be performing the full scale of operations that he always has, including hip and knee replacements or osseointegration surgeries. But a new area that I read about in a Mamma Mia article recently that he's entering into is a very controversial part of healthcare known as cosmetic limb lengthening. And so he was quoted in the article in Mamma Mia saying that women more and more now are wanting cosmetic limb lengthening, which is an invasive procedure. And he was quoted as saying, citing psychological studies that say shorter people are bullied at school, and this is why these types of procedures should be considered. Now, surgeons I've spoken to say these again are alarming public statements for a doctor in our country to be making, and there are real questions that remain for what the medical regulators are doing, whether they're overseeing this practice, and what ramifications there will be after this judgment that has made damning findings about his practice.
Well, like you say, these are damning findings that have been made against him. So what has Dr. Al Muderis said about this?
He posted a social media post on Facebook saying that he's disappointed by the judgment and that he intends to appeal. He said this was never about blocking transparency. Missing from his statement is any apology to his patients. So he still seems to me to be in a form of denial that he's done anything wrong. And underneath his post were many of his positive patients declaring their support for him. But there was also the occasional patient who said, "You really harmed me. Why are you still fighting this?" And I did notice that those were quickly deleted, some of those. But it intends that he's digging his heels in. He may appeal, he may not, but he has so far failed to acknowledge the errors of his practice.
And so what has the response actually been from the medical regulators? Like, how can Al Muderis continue practicing following this judgment, which I do have to alert listeners, this was a defamation judgment. This isn't a criminal court of law. But tell us how this works.
Both the medical regulators, the HCCC and AHPRA, said they are carefully considering the judgment. They're going through it in detail and they'll decide their next steps. So at this point, it doesn't look like they are launching an investigation or committing to any kind of investigation, which in my view is rather extraordinary.
And I guess just to wrap up, I mean, does this mean that we should be checking into whether a doctor who is about to operate on us or a loved one has had any findings against them? And is there somewhere we can check this?
So there is a national register published by AHPRA that publishes the profiles of every registered practitioner in the country. That can publish things like conditions on someone's registration, but what it doesn't publish is all the complaints that might have been found to be validated behind the scenes, but there is no conditions put in place. So a doctor could have a long list of complaints against them, a long list of medical negligence cases that have been settled for large sums of money, but the public has no idea about these. So in my view, there needs to be much greater transparency around what kind of information is published on that register so the public has the information they need to make decisions about their healthcare, to make informed decisions about their healthcare, which is the key thing here. Right now, there is a lack of transparency that is stopping people from having accurate information about the people who operate on them, which is a significant responsibility for these people. Right now, as it stands, with the register being, in my view, woefully inadequate, patients should always seek a second opinion. They should always ask around to their friends and colleagues about the doctor they intend to allow to operate on them and get a sense through word of mouth, because in my view, at this stage, that's the best we've got.
Now, Charlotte, I know this is a question that journalists don't often like to get because we don't like to be the center of the stories. Our job, of course, is to expose wrongdoing that happens to other people. But this has been a very personal story for you. You've been covering this for more than 3 years. So how are you now? You've obviously been through this grueling court process, not to mention, doggedly following this.
Well, at this very current moment, I'm kind of in the eye of the storm. There's been a lot of people who have come forward since the judgment to share their own experiences with Dr. Al Muderis. We've been doing some reporting this week on various reactions from organisations he claimed to be affiliated with. So I'm sort of haven't had that much time to stop and think about it. But ultimately, I'm really proud of the outcome, and I'm proud of the journalism, and I'm really, really, really happy for the patients. After the judgment, I got a call from Mark Urquhart, and he was tearing up as he spoke with me, and he was so thankful to be believed and so thankful for the opportunity to tell his story, which wasn't easy. He suffered a lot in the witness box as well. He suffered a lot throughout his life. And finally, for a court to rule that him and all the other patients were honest, credible, believable, good people meant the world, and that really means the world to me.
Well, we know this has not been an easy process for you, but we're so appreciated your work on this. So thank you so much, Charlotte, for your time.
Thank you.